finally that time of year again. And way before this day even came, I already knew immediately which game I wanted to take a look at this year. Mcgee'S Alice. Not Madness Returns, not yet at least, but the one I consider to be a masterpiece of interactive art. And yeah, Madness Returns improved the gameplay in almost every single way, but it lacks the truly sinister feeling and nature of this severely twisted adaptation of Wonderland. This is a perfect game for Halloween, but it also feels strangely to me like something that could also be enjoyed just as much around Christmas time, because it's so whimsical feely. And then again, this did come out in December. If you're a fan of Doom, there's very little chance you haven't heard of the game Strife that uses the original id Tech engine, or the game designer American McGee. Unless you're just some sort of poser. Strife was made by a little company called Rogue Entertainment, who would then go on to make an expansion pack for Quake, another one for Quake 2, and the Nintendo 64 port for Quake 2. American, who had worked on some stuff for Doom 2, Quake, and also Quake 2, approached them with the idea of creating a game that spoke to him and his personal aesthetics and visions. He was getting tired of the same Space Marine demon-killing stuff that everyone's so used to seeing with FPS games, and wanted to make something different for once. He decided to base this project off Alice in Wonderland since that was a medium that most people are familiar with in some way, whether it was the infamous books by Lewis Carroll or the also very well-known Disney movie of the same name. Not Tim Burton's Alice in Wonderland, because that wouldn't come out for like another decade. But it was overall something that the mass market could just pick up and enjoy without being completely lost if they didn't already play games. It was originally going to be a game for consoles, but it was being made on PC to prove to EA that it could be done. There was going to be some sort of PS2 port, but it somehow got cancelled and caused Rogue Entertainment to shut down, one of multiple factors that really angered American and caused him to leave EA. For the engine it was built on, they used the Heavy Metal Fact 2 engine with some of their own code and enhancements, which in turn was the id Tech 3 or Quake 3 engine with its own enhancements. As a result, the game had some superb graphics that was competing with other top titles at the time. In December of 2000, almost immediately after the game was released, film director Wes Craven signed to develop a film version of the game. However, it was then delayed and postponed over and over again for years, and I'm not even going to go into detail in this video, but it never ended up coming to light. On the other hand, American did make some amazing stop-motion short films based on the game to showcase its movie potential, so you should totally go check those out if you haven't already. In June 2011, a sequel was released titled Alice Madness Returns. This was the one most of my friends and ex-girlfriends played, seeing that they all had consoles, and most people seemed to argue it was a better game. That's a discussion for another day. However, there was an HD remaster of sorts you could buy as DLC for Madness Returns, and while I don't think you can buy it anymore, there are still ways to get it working. I'll go over that a little bit more later on, but taking a step back, American McGee'S Alice was originally released December 5th of 2000, published for EA, and was met with great response overall. It was originally put out in this very beautiful big box and had Alice with a bloody apron, holding a knife called the Vorpal Blade, and had the Cheshire Cat now looking noticeably more demented and twisted than previous adaptations. Not very much longer, I think like a couple of months or something like that, the cover was changed to show her instead holding a weapon in the game that looked much more mystical and fantasy-like, called the Ice Wand, as well as having the blood removed and the Cheshire Cat's anatomy lowered slightly. EA said this was due to complaints from various consumer groups, but American stated it was due to internal concerns at EA. This Ice Wand version was primarily released in a small box, probably how most people got the game, with Costco, Walmart, and Sam's Club releasing it in a larger big box about the same size as the Vorpal Blade one. And then there's the European version, which got the DVD case releases, one with the cover of Alice holding a deck of cards, and the other one of her looking through a shattered glass. Regardless of which version you get, the contents are the exact same across all of them, except for the two DVD versions that I just mentioned, which have different CD art and booklets. But going back to the original cover, I really like this cover. I don't know, there's just something about the inside of that heart that shows a little piece of Wonderland, and Alice with blood all over her apron, and the sadistic grin of that Cheshire Cat. Hell yeah. The box overall has these really cool gothic style patterns all over, and it's just a real feast on the eyes. You can open the gatefold to show previews to chapters of the games, as if they were taken straight from a book, which is kinda cool. The back shows the features and some pretty cool screenshots. Feel free to pause and take a look if you'd like. Here are the nicely embossed sides and top, and the bottom that has the system requirements. Once you're done drooling, you can open the box to reveal a quick reference card, a guide booklet, which is basically the manual of the game, and it goes over installation setup and gameplay and all that stuff. This patient log journal, which goes over the patient logs of Alice in the perspective of the doctor taking care of her. I always found this to be a really neat thing for them to include, and it can really add to the immersion in my opinion. It also adds in a lot of backstory and helps piece things together better if you care about that stuff. Americans specifically wanted this in here for the player to get immersed into the game world the moment they open up the box, before they even turn their PC on, and I think it definitely succeeded with that. But it's also not required to enjoy the game on its own, so you don't have to have it. And lastly, of course, a cover artworkless jewel case, if that's even a word, with the default controls on the back holding the game itself on two delightfully fitting CD-ROMs. If you collect these things, prices can really depend on what version you're going after. Ice One small boxes go for about 20 to 30 bucks, with the big box variants going for about 40 to 50, and the European DVD case versions with the deck of cards and the broken glass go for about 10 to 20. But the original Vorpal Blade big boxes with the blood are considered a highly sought after collectible these days and will frequently sell for 100 bucks used, which is kinda nuts, but for once it's a little bit understandable to me, because not only does that box look really cool, but it was probably only on store shelves for like a few months at most. So it's somewhat justified in this case, at least to me. But there will be a chance eventually that you can find it for cheaper, so if you want it, just keep an eye on eBay or something. Just wait around the corner and you'll find it. About a year after the game was released, there was a soundtrack CD made for it, which is amazing. Although it's missing some of the tracks and has some random dialogue placed in certain moments, but it's still awesome and definitely great to grab if you like the music as much as I did. There was also a Prima strategy guide, and it's not really needed since the game was easily completable without any hand-holding, give or take maybe 1 or 2 parts, but it has a Q&A with American Mcgee'S, so it might be worth grabbing for that if you care. And lastly of these notable things, there was a super cool tiny pewter of the Cheshire Cat you could get in some stores if you pre-ordered the game. Though these are extremely hard to find and are officially the rarest piece of merchandise of the series. And if none of this was enough, there were toys, backpacks, shirts, beanies, and countless other things out there that helped promote the game. If you went to the original website, you can find something that looked pretty awesome and had info on the game, playable games, which don't work anymore sadly, characters that have their beta models for some reason, screenshots, and you can download a playable demo, watch a trailer, a making of video, wallpapers, music, and 2 screensavers based on the game. They aren't accessible on newer systems and are super difficult to track down these days. Luckily I still have both of these, so one of them has random shrooms in Wonderland, and the other one, which I still have as my current screensaver on my 98, is the Cheshire Cat popping in and out of the screen, which is really cool. I can't really remember the first time I played the game myself. I feel like I played this at a friend's house when I was in elementary school or something, but the earliest memory that seems to come to me is seeing Madness Returns in the stores and being very intrigued by it. And I came to realize it was a sequel, so I downloaded the original game and ended up really liking it. And there isn't that much more to it, that's pretty much that. Since I play the game at least a few hours almost every Halloween, not usually all the way through, but still, it's a game that I really love. But there are some things I do feel like I need to address with the game after I put down the rose-tinted shades. For those interested, it is abandonware at this point, and if you would like to play, there's 3 ways you can get a hold of it. The first and most obvious one is to grab the physical copy itself. If you do that, you should be using a Windows 95 through Windows XP machine. Just put the disk in, select the install thing in the auto run, and follow the instructions. Very simple, very easy, very boring installer. If you're using anything higher than an XP, this installation is kinda messed up, and for whatever reason will completely remove the audio drivers or something like that. So you need to go to the ModDB page in the description and add that to the directory in order to fix it. After that, you should pretty much be good. If you can't be arsed to spend the time or money to hunt down a physical copy, then since I guess there's nothing happening with the game's release, you could just go onto an abandonware site and grab it from there. The one hosted on my abandonware doesn't need any of the extra steps that I went over, just download and extract it and you can start the game right up. But I would recommend you add this line in the config file found in the base folder of the game, so that the game will run as intended and sync up with your refresh rate. Another downside of using a modern system is that the sound quality will be terrible, since the game won't even pick up proper driver settings for some reason, even with the sound fix. There is a way to fix this and get the awesome EAX audio support working, but I haven't really had much luck with this myself just yet, so I don't know. And the third and final way you could get this game is if you buy the complete edition of the sequel Madness Returns. A remaster of this game is one of the DLC for that game, which is actually super cool and something I was pleasantly surprised to see when I did eventually get it. I'm not sure if the official DLC page still works for either the console or the PC versions, but if you do have it on the PC, you can download it from the link in the description and follow the instructions to get it working right after that. Okay, moving on. There was a demo put out shortly before the game released, and it had a lot of things cut in very different placements for weapons and items, so it's worth checking out on its own. It shows Tweedledee a lot earlier than he's supposed to be shown, has a Cheshire Cat loading screen instead of the map one in the final version, has some dialogues that are repeated twice for some reason.
Please don't dawdle, Alice. We're very late indeed. Please don't dawdle, Alice. We're very late indeed.
As well as others that weren't even used in the final game at all.
Is our situation not dismal? Wonderland is so discombobulated that ladybugs have turned belligerent and enlisted in the Queen's army. Punish their conversion.
It's different enough to where you can have a different experience playing this before the base game, so if you can check it out, I recommend it. This was also EA's first M-rated game, despite the violence being toned down a bit for this demo and the retail release, in comparison to the pre-release builds. It's still very over the top and graphic at times, but American fought for the rating to be M, so that children wouldn't pick up the game by accident, despite Alice having a knife and blood on her apron. I don't know, man, it was a weird time. Whether you play the demo or not, after Alice is installed, open up the game to be greeted by... We're literally at the splash screen, and it's already showing something weird and disturbing. I love it. In the main menu, you can start or load a game, quit the game, which also lets you view the credits for some reason instead of having its own thing in the main menu, and adjust the options. I really liked this model of Alice when you're in there, and it's kinda neat seeing her follow the cursor around and doing the action you select when you edit your controls, which I also recommend, because some of those buttons are very weirdly used. Also, while you're at it, make sure you adjust your graphics and sound settings, and you should finally be ready to start a new game. While you can play this on its own and still largely enjoy it, I do recommend reading the books beforehand. The Disney movies are alright, but reading both of the books and then transitioning to this will be a much better experience overall and a much better transition. So first things first, this game is a direct sequel to a novel called Through the Looking Glass, which in turn is also a direct sequel to the original Alice in Wonderland, both books originally by Lewis Carroll. It's not a reboot, even though it can totally be seen as one, and often gets mistaken as such. Now the only thing I can even remotely remember related to Alice in Wonderland is the animated Disney adaptation. Me and my mom watched it multiple times when I was a kid, but I barely remember it. So going into this game all those years ago, and even recently for this review, kind of threw me off, but you can still understand most of what's going on without having seen or read it. It's, I guess, a mix between a sequel and a fresh adaptation. All of the familiar characters and enemies all have very twisted, disturbing redesigns, and it redoes the Alice chasing the rabbit thing.
No time to say goodbye. Hello, I'm late.
But the story plays out as she's much older now and returning to Wonderland. The gist of the backstory goes a little bit after the events of Through the Looking Glass. Alice was sound asleep until her cat happened to knock off a lamp, which leaks oil and in turn ends up lighting the house on fire. killing both of Alice's parents and burning her house down in the process. Understandably, this severely f***ed her up, and we're shown her years later at age 17 in her current crazy state. Which then takes us to her falling back into Wonderland with some of the most beautiful and haunting music you'll ever hear in a game. Wait a sec. I can't play this because stupid ass Diet ICP over here stole this entire song and claimed it as his. F*** you. I'm not going to say much more about the story because I don't want to spoil stuff, even though you probably should have read or watched Alice in Wonderland at some point in your life. But I will say that owning a physical copy of this game and reading the patient log booklet that came with it does quite a bit in regards to explaining the lore of the game. It's basically what Alice's psychiatrist or doctor is observing of her in the real world, while everything in the game is taking place. It's super creative, and reading this thing also helps you feel really immersed. I already said this, I don't know why I'm okay. The graphics were, at the time, pretty damn good, and they still hold up really well today. The world is quite detailed and will probably suck you into this darker, more twisted version of Wonderland. The main reason I found myself playing this game a lot over the years is because I really liked seeing what kind of ridiculous place I'd be finding next. Everything is packed to the brim with lots of attention to detail, and you'll go across lots of memorable and very strange places that are just a joy to play through. A lot of them are recognizable from the original stories as well, like this house the Duchess is in, the Pool of Tears, this really cool looking castle area, the Lair of the Queen, etc, etc. The levels are designed quite well, and while really weird and labyrinthine, don't feel too maze-like or confusing. There's maybe once or twice I got stumped on where to go in the entire game. One of them was this area where you have to throw a knife at a clock. I have no idea how anyone is supposed to figure that out, and the other one I can't even remember. But everything else is designed really well. On top of this, the characters are just as strange and memorable. The Cheshire Cat looks pretty evil, as you saw earlier, even though he's not at all. The rabbit looks really weird, I don't know how else to describe him. The Duchess, the Caterpillar, the Card Guards, etc, etc. Everyone looks awesome. They did an awesome job revisioning these characters in nightmare form. This game is awesome, you should go play it. Why are you listening to me talk? The game controls pretty decently with a mouse and keyboard, but it feels kinda weird, like it was supposed to be a first-person shooter or something from the start. The combat feels just fine, but the movement feels a little wonky and off for a third-person shooter or platformer. To give you a pretty spot-on idea on how this feels, it's kinda like playing Quake 3 in third-person mode. I don't believe controllers were supported for this, could be wrong, but they were in the remaster, and they won't really do much good for you in here. The cursor is pretty cool and it kind of follows you around, and I love when games do this even though it's really rare. It makes aiming feel smoother or something. I don't know, but yeah. If you want to perfectly aim your jumps, you have to aim your cursor a little bit ahead of you, and you'll see little footprints indicating that that's where Alice is going to jump. Overall, I'm a little mixed on how you control Alice. The gameplay consists of Alice doing puzzles, fighting creatures that make you think you're on acid, and doing platformy things, again feeling kinda wonky for a third-person game but still largely playable. The red health bar on the left represents Alice's mental sanity, and the blue mana bar on the right represents her strength of will. But I'm just gonna refer to them as health and mana because I am a nerdy piece of shit. The combat isn't bad by any means, and you get a whooping 9 toys to torture your victims with, as any PC game should. But it also isn't this game's strength either. I personally never really felt too connected to Alice with the combat. It just feels kinda stiff and off, for a lack of better words. It's not as awkward as the movement, but it can take a sec to get adjusted to, especially the throwable weapons that handle a little strange. On the flip side, I found the stream-based weapons with beams coming out of them to be super satisfying and useful to use. And the weapons are all pretty unique, so there are some positives to it. There's some moments here and there that'll spice up the game and add to some variety, like this section where you're swimming underwater, or this one where you're turned into a chess piece. It's really creative stuff like that, and of course the level design, that really help keep the game from feeling stale. Sadly though, the game is super linear, going from level to level with no backtracking, having the same level pass every time you play, which could be a good or bad thing depending on how you look at it, but this is a negative thing in my eyes because it leads to far less replayability than it should. For me and others who really love and appreciate this game, American addressed this perfectly in an interview, He said that he knows this is a super linear game and that people will find issues with that, but he didn't think branching paths was necessary, and it was kind of similar to how people rewatch movies. You know, you watch a movie and in most cases you won't rewatch it immediately after. You'll give it maybe like a few months or a year or two, and then remember that so-and-so was a good movie, and pick it back up and still have a good time with it again. Alice is pretty much the same way, and on the plus side, it's quite a lengthy game too, easily 15 to 20 hours long on a first time playthrough. Maybe 5 or 6 if you know exactly what you're doing. The Cheshire Cat was originally intended to be summoned to aid Alice in battle, but was scrapped later on in development for some reason. It definitely wasn't for scope, because there was a weapon that does exactly the same but summons demons and not the cat. Instead, the Cheshire Cat is basically like Alice's conscience. He provides dialogue for most things, being the voice of reason and logic over everything and everyone else in Wonderland, and can be summoned at any time for cryptic sounding advice depending on when and where you summon him. There aren't too many items to get in here, and each of them are straight up and to the point. There's healing items and power-up items, the latter of which are spread out quite a bit throughout the game. Red orbs replenish health, these veils replenish mana, mini hearts that are dropped every single time you kill an enemy restore a little bit of both, while large ones restore a bigger amount of both. Rage boxes turn Alice into some sort of bloodthirsty Michael Jackson demoness chick and puts her into some sort of berserk mode, where all of her attacks are 3 to 4 times stronger than they normally are. She switches to the Vorpal Blade and can slice through enemies like butter. Every time Alice gets a hold of this, the floors will get painted with her carnage, and it's a beautiful sight. Especially if you're crazy and a little bit f***ed up in the head like me. Then there's the grasshopper tea that Alice will drink, with a kinda creepy but really cool looking animation, and it makes her run faster and jump higher. This only shows up 3 times in the entire game, and it's the only one of the 3 power-up items that show up period in the demo. And lastly, the darkened looking glass mirrors. Now, I never found a single one of these in any of my previous playthroughs, but they're these mirrors that Alice looks at to turn invisible for a little bit, and they are by large the most difficult items to find in the game aside from the final weapon. I'm guessing not very many people found all of these, if any, since, like the grasshoppers, there's only 3 in the entire game, but each of them are very well hidden and intentionally so. The first one is under here before the Pale Realm, or the Chess World if it's easier for you to remember that. The second one you have to know exactly when and where to get it and time everything exactly on point. And the last one is up here, where no one would normally guess to look. They're very much worth the effort though, since they make enemies completely oblivious to you even if you touch them, which is great for bypassing large groups of enemies, all of which are right outside the place you get them. Moving on to the weapons, you get 9 of them to decimate your enemies with, most of them having an alternate attack too, which is cool, and all of them having their own idle animations, which I found to be a really nice little touch. The Vorpal Blade is the starting and most iconic weapon in both games. It's pretty weak, but it remains handy all the way through. Alt attacks throw the blade, and you have to wait a few seconds for her to get it back into her hands. This is the only weapon in the game where neither attacks use mana, so while it is a last resort, it could be very useful at times if you want to preserve it. It's also seemingly the most violent weapon to use, as enemies frequently get decapitated with it, making its usage a little rewarding. The deck of cards is like a machine gun. Alt fire is a spread out attack, kinda like a shotgun. I didn't really use this that much aside from the beginning of the game. They run through mana real fast and are practically useless later on, so The Croquet Mallet is the weapon that you'll use almost constantly throughout the game. The regular attack is melee based, so it doesn't require mana, and it's noticeably stronger than the Vorpal Blade. Alt attacks have Alice throw an electric ball or some shit out, and she hits it like a baseball pitcher, except instead of trying to hit a home run, she hits her victims. Jack bombs are basically explosive jack-in-the-boxes and function like grenades. Alt attacks will throw the box, but instead of immediately detonating, they'll act like a fire-based sprinkler system and then explode. Very overpowered, but also very easy to get yourself killed too, so be careful. The Ice Wand, which is the weapon that's on the cover, is like a reverse flamethrower in a sense where it sprays out a beautiful icy stream and then freezes whoever it touches. Alt attacks are more defensive and create this shield of ice. It's immensely satisfying to use, and it's my second favorite weapon in the game. Almost every single enemy in this game has a freezing death animation for when this one weapon is used, which is really a testament to how much attention to detail this game really has. Jacks are extremely useful, having them bounce around and home in at their targets. Whenever you finally get these, they pretty much become your primary weapon over the mallet, due to their effective usage and very low mana consumption. Sometimes I even feel this weapon's a little bit too powerful and makes the game feel really easy, so I personally recommend using it a little bit less if it's your first time playing, unless you're playing on Nightmare, because then it's probably fine. Alt attacks throw all the jacks at the enemy like a shotgun blast, but the main fire is immensely more useful, so I don't really ever use the alt attack. The diabolical dice are pretty fucking badass, but they're not super useful. You throw a pair of dice on the ground with a freaking pentagram as your aiming reticle. Sometimes it won't work, which might throw you off a little bit, but that's because Alice needs to roll a 6 on the dice, and when she does, a portal to hell opens and reaches out a demon to aid her in combat. No alternate attack, but it's the only upgradable weapon in the game, which can be done up to 3 times. The more it upgrades, the more dice she throws, and in turn the better chance she has to summon, and the stronger it is the demon that gets summoned. The first one is this imp thing, the second one is this guy, and the third one is this. The Jabberwock's Eye Staff is the second most powerful weapon in the game, and it's made up of various required pieces picked up throughout the game. It's my personal favorite weapon out of all of them, and just like the Ice Wand, it's super satisfying to use. Again, once you get this weapon, you'll probably just use this the most since it takes out the tougher enemies rather quickly, and maybe occasionally switch back to the mallet whenever you're running out of mana. Alt attacks shoot up these blasts that are super powerful and lands them down, but they can also easily get yourself killed. The Blunderbuss is the final, most powerful, and only seeker weapon in the entire game. You can miss this entirely and still finish the game with no issue. There's only 2 times you can get it, once after the battle with the Jabberwock by Humpty Dumpty. You gotta go press this brick by him and grab it over here through the secret entrance, and once more at the end of the game during the final battle on a hidden bottom ledge around here. There's also a stopwatch you can get, but it doesn't really count as a weapon. It can briefly stop time at any moment, and it doesn't use any mana, but the catch here is that you can only use it once per level. So, use it wisely, as there are times you'll absolutely need to use a stopwatch to progress. You'll be using these on enemies like card guards, mushrooms, plants, ladybugs that drop bombs on you for some reason, ants, boojums that serve no other purpose than pushing you off random ledges. F*** these guys. Chess pieces, lava men, phantasmagorias, fire imps or demons, and fire snarks, jabber spawns, and robots. Yeah, there were a lot of them. There was also an unreleased enemy called a fungi, which was supposed to be a large bloated creature that floats around, with another small humanoid creature hanging from it that has a childlike face, an insect-like tail, no legs, and arms with gloves on the ends. I honestly wonder why this was never made. It would have been cool, but I'm still pretty happy with the others. Except for the boojums, because they can f*** right off. And of course, there's the boss battles, which all have their own attacks and need to be avoided, but unlike Alice's plethora of 90s PC game siblings, it doesn't reuse bosses as regular reoccurring enemies in the game, since they're mostly important story characters. And I really like this because I always found that annoying. The voice acting in this game is kind of a mixed bag. You've got your main characters with superb voice acting like Alice, and especially the Cheshire Cat. And good lord, I mean, seriously, listen to this guy.
A reflection sometimes exposes more reality than the object it echoes. Only a few find the way. Some don't recognize it when they do. Some don't ever want to. Hanging ropes are as good as stepladders to those who know how to use them. This unique watch stops time, for a time. Unlike death, time moves on. Those who stood still with time move on also, unless they're dead.
He was voiced by Roger Jackson, and every single line he delivers is an absolute treat to hear. If you don't know who he is, he's well known for his roles as the voices in the Scream movies, as well as various characters from games, animated shows, and other movies. I think he even voiced Mojo Jojo from the Powerpuff Girls. The only nitpick I have is that sometimes he seems to speak in run-on sentences, and I'm not entirely sure if this is supposed to be part of his character, or this was actually an honest mistake.
As knowing where you're going is preferable to being lost, ask. Rabbit knows a thing or two, and I myself don't need a weather vane to tell which way the wind blows. Let your need guide your behavior. Suppress your instinct to lead. Pursue, Rabbit.
Other than that, I'd say he steals the show easily. Alice herself was voiced by Susie Bran, who also did a pretty damn good job overall and turns Alice into a strong, snarky bitch, which I love.
Stop that wailing, won't you?
I was almost soup.
Tragic, I'm sure, but I'm a bit pressed for time.
On a sad note, Susie hasn't done very many other roles aside from a few minor characters in various TV series and games, but her voice acting fits Alice perfectly, and she makes some of the most painful sounding death screams I think I've ever heard. But then there are moments where she's crying and there's literal 2-second loops of the same sound every single time she cries, and it feels weird. Yeah, I don't know why they just have the same loop repeating every single time she cries. And to top it off, the times that it happens ends super abruptly, so it's just weird. The rest of the characters, for the most part, have pretty comical voice acting. They're not terrible though, and they could be far worse. Most of the British voices are done pretty well, but the American ones are,
Nobility must be served, I suppose.
Stop that wailing, won't you?
You're very cold-blooded for a mammal.
You won't fight alone. Permit me to serve as your commander. I'll muster the forces whose allegiance your courage and skill have already won.
But I think in the grand scheme of things, the voice acting is very memorable with Alice and the cat. The sound effects are awesome, and the game makes great use of the then super innovative EAX audio. It's a real shame that games no longer quite have the same audio attention that games once did. This thing made games even more immersive than they already were, and Alice is definitely no exception. I couldn't get it to be emulated on my newer machine, and I don't have the proper sound card on my 98. But this is gameplay taken from a different channel, which you can check out in one of the links below if you want. Speaking of sound, the game also had an absolutely phenomenal soundtrack done by none other than Chris VRENNA of 9 Inch Nails. For a game like this, you'd probably expect something either really atmospheric or some intense heavy metal or something like that. But instead, it's everything you need to perfectly get an idea on how this game feels. The music is dark, melancholic, and depressing, yet catchy, beautiful, and hauntingly melodic. You'll notice this the moment you start up the game and hear that haunting chorus in both the main menu and the very first level of the game. It sounds very different from most other game soundtracks, and that was because Chris was instructed to use kid toys and xylophones and stuff, and not use any synthesizers. In turn, we get one of the most unique and memorable game soundtracks made, possibly ever. Some tracks have this industrial sound to it, while others just sound like there's something straight out of a horror movie, and you really just gotta listen to some of this yourself. The game Shadow Man did something similar with some tracks, and that was another thing I really loved about that game. But one game at a time, right? There are a lot of really morbid details to the soundtrack too if you're really paying attention. The songs on their own are eerie enough, but if you listen closely, some of these tracks are just... ah, man. I mean, for example, just listen to this one. You can clearly hear a woman crying. Usually, people would probably just sample a little girl crying, but you can tell this is Alice crying, doing a much better job than she actually does in the game itself for some reason, but in here you can tell she is severely suffering from loss, and it's almost a little bit hard to listen to. Or this, whatever the hell is going on here. Or this one that's actually a little bit disturbing to me. This plays in the very first boss battle with the Duchess, and you can faintly hear a woman screaming and crying. It's not too noticeable, mainly because you're in the heat of a battle, but when you sit down and you hear it, it's kind of unsettling. The craziest thing is that apparently that screaming is Alice's nurse. In the patient log booklet that comes with the game, one of the entries says Alice was attacking one of the nurses trying to give her a bath, called her Duchess. So as Alice is attacking the Duchess in Wonderland, she's actually slashing at the nurse that's taking care of her in the real world. Jesus Christ, man. There's no special cheat codes or anything like that. I mean, they're pretty basic stuff like God and NoClip, but there are a few notable Easter eggs and references. The first and most obvious one is the whole off with her head thing. You'll hear the infamous line if you play the game all the way till the end. In the gardens, there are these creepy vampire portraits that are from Dracula and are pretty cool. When you're in the Pale Realm, you can find portraits of Alice and the Cheshire Cat, as well as Lewis Carroll himself. And there's also random paintings of foreshadowing, like this over here showing Alice battling the centipede. There wasn't any multiplayer for Alice, which was kind of unusual for a game on the id Tech 3 engine. I mean, Quake 3 was pretty much a multiplayer only game. I've seen a lot of people complain about this, but I personally think it's a really stupid complaint. Alice was never meant to be a game to play with other people. It's a game that's meant to draw you towards the characters, story, and lore, and you know, put you into this strange and twisted world of Wonderland, and I really wouldn't want it any other way. I usually prefer games that are a little bit more open-ended, but when they make such a unique and special world with its own distinct feel, atmosphere, and characters that you actually tend to care about, I can fully appreciate that it got the attention and treatment that it deserved. Pretty much the last thing I want to go over is the remaster that was re-released as DLC for Madness Returns. If you want to get this version working and you have Madness Returns on PC, then I dropped a link with instructions in the description and pinned comment. Mainly because I don't think you can actually buy this anymore, but yeah. The main difference here is that the audio is completely fixed for newer systems, albeit not nearly as good as the original with proper EAX enabled. There's now controller support as well, which makes it a little bit more accessible to more people, with a page to show the controls if you're using a controller, and the game can run in modern resolutions. Personally speaking, I usually prefer the 4:3 ratio, since I can't stand how stretched out older games look or how tiny the HUDs are whenever you use higher resolutions. And while the main menu is stretched out and looks pretty weird, the game itself looks perfectly fine, especially with the more smooth and crisp textures. And for once, the HUD doesn't get tiny if the res gets higher. You know, like it does in Hitman or Unreal. What in God's name is this shit? How the hell do you read this? According to things that people have said, this game is easier in the remaster, which doesn't really make too much sense because the item placements, the damage, and everything all felt exactly the same to me. But for whatever reason, I also found the HD remaster to feel a little bit easier than the original game, despite it being the very first version I played up until completion. Also, apparently in this remaster you can't summon the Cheshire Cat whenever you want, which isn't too big of a deal, but I don't know why they would take that out. And lastly, the violence was also toned down with this, particularly in the audio. Visually they're pretty much the same, but if you compare the audio between the two versions, I don't really know why they toned it down. Try and compare these two. The original game versus this remaster. It's also missing that terrifying EA logo whenever you started up the original game. All in all, I don't think this remaster is worth going through all of the extra trouble to get it working, but it does have better support for modern systems, so make of that what you will. So, you could probably already guess by now that I really love this game. And of course I do. This is a game that's had my heart for years upon years, and it's without a doubt definitely one of my all-time favorites for PC. While I find this one a little bit harder to recommend to a general audience than its sequel, I would instead actually recommend this much more than Madness Returns for fans of morbid fantasy and genuine horror. The gameplay hasn't really aged well, and it's clearly kinda rough around the edges, especially with the platforming sections. And a lot of the voice acting of the other characters is meh. But other than that, this game blows most other games out of the water. Whether you play the game for a couple of levels or all the way through, it's a very memorable and easily identifiable game, and there's really nothing quite like it, not even the sequel. Its dark, atmospheric world, hauntingly beautiful melodies, very memorable characters, or cat, cool, unique weapons, great amounts of love put into the creation of the world overall, and just how it feels makes it an experience you probably won't forget if you play it. And considering today being Halloween and time coming closer to the winter, there isn't really a better time to play this one. So if you haven't already and you have the time, you should definitely check this one out. Wonderland awaits thee. Thank you so much for watching my video on Alice. If you want to see more pointlessly in-depth videos like this one, feel free to give me a subscribe. They take many, many hours to make, so any support is immensely appreciated. I hope you have an awesome Halloween, or maybe just a normal day for watching this some other time. And once again, thank you very much for watching.